Well, good morning. I'm tickled to be with you today. This is a pleasurable Tuesday because we get to sit down and study the Bible together. We're studying in the 12th chapter of Luke, and we'd like to have you come out and talk with us, study with us, get your Bible open. Been in Luke 12 a while now. You can participate in any of this at any time. You will monitor chat for your questions and comments, and that'll get you involved in the class a little bit more. Get you, I don't know all the answers to these things, and I can use a little help occasionally. There's a couple of verses in what we're going to look at today that I don't really know everything there is to know about. You can use the comment section or chat section of this YouTube broadcast. I'm looking at my iPhone right now, and there's live chat on there. I think Pancho over here, my engineer, put on a little bit, just saying that we're about to start. You can also reach us by phone if you want to, and we'll get you on the air. You can reach us at here in Indianapolis. This program comes to you from the High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road here in Indianapolis. And you can reach us at 257-3000. Now, if you're out of that calling area, because thank goodness YouTube, I guess, goes all over the world, you can reach us at 1-800-423-2484. And we'll be tickled to death to have you with us anytime and any place. You can also reach us by email at proveallthings@comcast.net. So you've got your choices there, and we would like to have you come out and be with us. Let's see if I can get everything geared up here. This is sort of going to be our thing. This is a modern picture. I kept trying to look for a picture from Bible times. Of course, it wouldn't have been a photo, but for what's my word? I want to say a painting from Bible times that I thought got the idea. But maybe this will do it. In the Watching for the Groom, which is a happy time on many occasions. My engineer Pancho over there is driving me crazy. Are we on the air? Are we good?
No, yeah, we're fine.
We're good. I don't know what he's doing. We're not fine. Says your computer went to sleep, Pancho. We'll be back in a minute. If you're still hearing us, we're going to figure this out. We'll be back here in just a minute.
I got to try again, button.
Give it a try.
It was like stopped. I mean, I couldn't click on nothing.
Yeah, I saw that you were kind of hanging fire on us there. Am I on? You said be on here.
No, you're off.
It says I'm live here, Pancho. I don't know what that means. We would really like to have a phone call from one of you now telling us whether we're live or not, or whether we went off the air. If you're out there, you might let us know. And we would really like to have a phone call from somebody telling us whether we're live, actually, or off the air. Not everybody seems to be paying attention today, which is a particular irritant, but anyway.
5 viewers.
We got viewers? Are they actually viewing? Somebody tell me what's going on.
There's a call.
There's somebody caller. We'll see. It says you're live. They're all writing us. That phone number, you goofy people. Okay, we're live, Pancho. I don't know what you're doing over there, but we're going to go from here. Let's get over to Luke 12. We'll cut out all this foolishness if we could figure out what we're doing in life. We're going to talk about Luke 12. Let's get over there and see what we can do. Sometimes I have to shoot the engineer, but we usually like him. So anyway, he's related, so we're sort of stuck with him. We got to, in our study last week, I'll hush up here a minute. We got to about verse 41 in Luke 12. And I sort of hated that. We try to keep to the 30-minute format as best we can. It stuck me right in the middle of a conversation, so I wanted to deal with that just a little bit. Jesus has begun a conversation with his disciples earlier in this section. And so in verse 41, the statement that we have here from Peter is a sort of a typical Peter interjection. As you know, he does that a lot. And it's interesting in several regards in that it's so typically Peter. Here, I got to get my notes exactly where I want. Pancho got me all bumfuzzled. I love to blame things on him, but he usually can't throw. He said once or twice he's thrown things at me. But this is so characteristic of Peter to interrupt the Lord. He interrupts him right in the middle of this conversation. This paragraph, which stretches from verses 22 through 40, was addressed directly to the disciples. And so Peter puts in a question here in the middle of it. Now, two or three interesting things about it. First of all, it's so very much like Peter. He does the same thing on the Mount of Transfiguration. Remember back in Luke 9, verse 33, he puts in a question there, well, let's build 3 tabernacles for Moses and Elijah and for you, Lord. But he does the same sort of thing here. He interrupts him basically in the middle of this conversation. And he's certain about the 12. He says, I'm sure you're talking to us, but I want to know if anybody else is included in this. Does anybody else have to watch? For instance, he's talking about the necessity of watching, and in the verses before. So now he wants to know, well, is anybody else included in that watching? Okay, having established that, which is pretty clear from the conversation, let's also note that this indicates that what Luke is giving here is historical information. In other words, if you were writing the story, if you were sort of making it up a little bit as you went, you wouldn't have this interruption in the middle of Jesus' conversation. It isn't the place for an interruption. And so it points to the fact that that Luke in his writing is giving us actual historical information. Peter interrupted him. So anyway, let's read this section and then we'll go back and comment on about it. I'm going to try. I may have bitten all more than I can chew today too in my plans. But anyway, who then is that faithful and wise steward whom his Lord shall make ruler over his household, to give them their portion of meat in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Of a truth I say to you that he will make him ruler over all that he hath. But and if that servant say in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming, and this, by the way, this material is unique to Luke. My Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to beat his manservants and maidens, and to eat and drink and be drunken. The Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looketh not for him, and at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him in sunder, and will appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. And that servant which knew his Lord's will, and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. But he that knew not, and did commit things worthy of stripes, shall be beaten with few stripes. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall much be required. And to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more. I'm going to try to get beyond there, but I'm definitely going to try to make it to that point in our conversation today. And I did notice a bunch of you. Oh, thank you very much. So obviously all of you are out there and you're all silent as the tomb during the program, but suddenly if I ask, are we on the air, you're all telling me. And I really appreciate having you here. Even those of you who commented that I'm live and looking very handsome today. So it's good to have you. This first section is very similar to the account of the wise and foolish virgins. Back up in, I get all tangled up, and I'm going to go drop back. I skipped too much. Working on last week's and this week's lesson, I got all fired up in the latter part. We're going to try to get through this. I'll hurry up. I'm going to go back to verse 32, which is really where we're supposed to start. Sell that ye have and give alms. Provide yourselves bags which wax not old. This shows it's a live program also, historical data. A treasure in the heavens that faileth not, where no thief approacheth, neither moth corrupteth. And this is very similar, of course, to the account in the Sermon on the Mount, where he tells us to sacrifice everything that we need to. And I think we talked about this last week. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Now then, let your loins be girded about, and your lights burning. Because of the loose garments that they wore in their usual attire, the Bible oftentimes talks about let your loins be girded about. They needed to throw a belt around their clothing, or otherwise there were other ways they could fasten up this loose clothing so they could get on the move, either so they could work or so they could run or travel. There were other ways to tie up those loose garments to make them able to do the things they needed to do. And so that's why it talks about let your loins be girded about and your lights burning. This is very akin to the parable of wise and foolish virgins. Only here there's not virgins, he's talking about the men. And so ye yourselves like unto men that wait for their Lord, whom he will return, when he will return from the wedding, that when he cometh and knocketh, they may open to him immediately. And then, of course, then would proceed the wedding feast. And all of this has having to do with their but he goes on, it's even more obviously very much like the wise and foolish virgins. He said, blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, he shall gird himself and make them to sit down and meat, and will come forth and serve them. And if he should come in the second watch or the third watch, will find them so. Blessed are those servants. Now, there's two or three things that are not known about this. That you have two at least time systems. You have the Jewish time system, which divided the night period into 3 watches. And so the second watch or the third watch would begin to be late at night. The Roman time period divided the night into 4 watches. And so second or third would be, either right before or right after midnight. And it's not exactly clear which one he's using, which way the Lord refers to it. It would be really easy to say, well, he's a Jew, and so he would use the Jewish time system. Yeah, but Luke is not a Jew, and he's not writing to Jews. And so there is quite a bit of controversy, and we'll notice perhaps in our study here in Luke, we'll notice more of that later on in the book of Luke. Not controversy, but at least reason to examine the text a little closer to notice that timing just a little bit more. So it's not known exactly here what he was talking about, but he is telling them that it may be delayed. And it's sort of interesting, I debated a few years ago a preterist who seemed to have the idea that the Lord was always saying, well, I'm just going to be here right around the corner, just going to be here immediately. And so he's always pointing to 70 AD somehow as the fulfillment of all of those. But the Lord wasn't always saying that. He does say he was going to come suddenly. He does that in several passages. For instance, Luke 21, lest any time, let's see, take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life, that day come upon you unawares. He was going to come upon them suddenly, quickly, but he does not ever talk about necessarily coming soon. And so in several places, he talks about the fact that it may be delayed. It may not be as soon as they wanted. And so he says he wants them to be watching. And if he comes in the second watch or the third watch, and this is very similar to the parable, as I say, of the wise and foolish virgins. But anyway, I'll go on here, having started off in the middle of our lesson. This know that if the goodman of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken through. And all those people who, this is very similar to Matthew 24, where the Lord tells us that if we had known, he first of all predicts 70 AD down to about verse 34, Matthew 24, and then he says, hey, but of that day and hour knoweth no man. Here, the goodman of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. You know, in 2 Peter, let's see if I can get things set here where I can read them to you. 2 Peter 3, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, 1,000 years of the day. The Lord is not slack concerning his promises. Some men count slackness, but his long suffering dothward, not willing that any should perish. Okay, now then, finally I'll get back. I got all confused there at the first. Lord, speakest thou this parable unto us, or even all? And here you have this interruption that I spoke of at the beginning of the program by Peter. And so verse 42, to some extent, is an answer to Peter's question. Peter was asking, well, now you're just talking to us, the 12 disciples, because what we just read was addressed to the 12 disciples. And so Peter wants to know, you're just talking to us, or you're talking to everybody here? And the Lord says, well, who then is that faithful and wise steward? In other words, everybody, not just you, Peter, not just the 12 disciples, but everyone needs to be a faithful and wise steward and to take care of his responsibilities. Verse 42 is to some extent an interesting passage to me. It's so foreign to our current American way of thinking. But perhaps some of you who are listening to this or watching this were alive and conscious during the Second World War. And I've been wanting to talk to my mother lately about the rationing in the Second World War. I know that they rationed sugar and tires and gasoline, and I don't know about what other things. Maybe if one of you are out there and would like to dial on the telephone, who was through that period of time, could tell us, you know, what else did they ration? Did they ration bacon and other foods? I'm sure that they did. I'm sure in some countries they did. But here, the Lord is over his servants, a steward over his servants. And they didn't get just to eat all that they wanted. You know, my kids sit down at a meal and they can just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat all they want. We're not going to say to them, no, you can't eat any more broccoli. We do say you can't eat any more candy, you're going to kill yourself. But it's unlimited almost. But here, in the case of these servants, he would appoint them their portion of meat in due season. The faithful steward will give them their portion. He would ration it out to them. Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. In other words, the steward who's taking care of the household. rationing out the food. He's not eating it all for himself or selling it on the streets or whatever. Of a truth, I say to you that he will make him ruler over all that he hath. But if that servant, and again, he's answering Peter's question, it's applying to everyone, not just to the 12, but he's speaking to the 12 down through this section. But if that servant say in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming, shall again to beat the men servants and maidens, and to eat and drink and to be drunken, obviously neglecting the responsibilities of care over the household, the Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looketh not for him, and in an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him in sunder. And that, that sounds pretty bad, but it really was done on occasion in the scriptures. For instance, Isaiah. The tradition is that Isaiah is the individual referred to in Hebrews, where it talks about some who were sawn asunder. You remember, some who were sated and sawn asunder, that Isaiah was one of those who was sawn asunder. The text, of course, the text of the Bible doesn't bear that out, but that is to some extent the tradition. You have some others, for instance, in 1 Chronicles 20 and verse 3, some others who were sawn asunder. And Daniel 2 and verse 5, he talks about some people being cut in pieces as a punishment. He will, pretty serious punishment, will appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. In other words, he would be removed from his servant. That service, that servant which knew his Lord's will. You've got me on, I'm all nervous today for some reason. I'll try to bear up. I was hoping one of you was going to write me about that rationing thing. My mother doesn't have YouTube, and there's one or two of you on here is old enough to know about that rationing during the Second World War to let me actually know about it. So now's the time to write. Just what sort of things did they ration? Like I say, I've been meaning to ask my mom. You might as well tell me about that if you know. Probably none of you want to admit that you're that old, but but anyway, verse 48, he that knew not and did commit things worthy of stripes shall be beaten with few stripes. Now, I have two or three things while we're studying this. You've always heard it, if you're, religious at all, you've and studied your Bible, you've heard people say that the Jews were restricted to distributing 40 stripes. They couldn't give any more than 40 stripes, and so they always would only give 39 in order to not go over the limit the Lord made. But you need to think about this. First of all, it's probably obvious that in dealing with their servants, they didn't always give 39 stripes. Maybe they'd say this one deserves 10 or 5 or 20 or whatever. But you also need to realize that 39 stripes was not absolute with the Jews. They had, there was a little problem. The 39 stripes, their 40 stripes was limited to the event. Now, they could easily say, in adjudicating this, that a man was guilty of 2 crimes. He was a pickpocket and he hit the guy. You assaulted him and you stole his money. In that case, sometimes they would give 80 stripes or 39 plus 39. And so it could be they gave more. And I've got a comment here I want to go to in just a minute on chat, but there is some possibility that when Paul talks about this, and he says 5 times, I was beaten with 39 stripes, save one, those may not be separate occasions. There may be some indications where he got 39 stripes, and then he got another 39 stripes because they came up with a second reason to give him 40. Okay, here we go. Here, alrighty. Here's one commenter on our thing said that my teacher in middle school said they used to ration honey and tires during the war. I think Grandma told me wooden tires became common during that time. Wooden tires? Okay, you could not get certain types of material for clothing. Nylons, yeah, that we've all heard about that on watching movies. Plus, cars were not made for a couple of years, or tractors and farming equipment. And I'm telling my age on air. I'm sure you were only about 3 years old at the time and are merely recounting stories your grandmother and mother told you about the war. But I appreciate it. And it was that idea of rationing, and I still need to ask my mom. She'll give me a fuller list. I think she is fairly familiar with the things that happened during the war there. Now, what time we got? I don't want to run out of time here. A lot of people, when they study this passage, say, well, this passage is teaching an idea of a mitigated punishment in hell. That when we get to hell, that there's going to be some people in a worse part of hell. Their punishment is only going to be of 500 degrees, whereas the real bad sinners are going to be suffering 1,000 degrees. In other words, a relative punishment in hell. By virtue of this particular parable, which illustrated some people beaten with many stripes and some people beaten with few stripes. Now, may I suggest to you that that's not what it's teaching? And here's how I know. And to quote the old Bible story, because the Bible tells me so. If you look at verse 48 and see the conclusion that Jesus makes of the parable himself, what lesson does he draw from the parable? And his lesson is not a lesson about punishment, but it's a lesson about judgment and requirement. He says, for unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. And to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more. Now, if I may illustrate that, that's very similar to, find my Bible and all this mess here on my desk. It's a good thing the camera doesn't show all that mess on my desk. Turn with me over into James. And of course, the 3rd chapter, you perhaps are familiar with it. My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to be in a worse part of hell, but it means we are responsible for more. And that's what he's saying here. To whom much is committed, much is going to be required. There are people of tremendous wealth. There are people of tremendous intelligence. There are people who have tremendous opportunities to teach the gospel and to influence people, and God is holding them to a higher standard than a man who has little mind, little money, and little opportunity. And so it applies to judgment. The president of this country will be required more will be required of him than the poorest man who barely has any mind, who never learned to read, and who has no opportunity in life. And so it's a question of judgment. We're going to, when we come to the end, did I do the best I could with what I had? Well, the Lord would say, hey, I gave you $1 million. What'd you do with that? Did you shower it all on yourself, or did you think of anyone else? I gave you you were a senator, you were a president, you were a king. What did you do with that? What influence did you have? Did you use any of it? It's sort of the same sort of idea that he had earlier in this chapter about the rich farmer who was given so much and could only think about himself. It's not saying he's going to be worse in hell. That's the Lord does not illustrate that part of this parable. And he does that in several of the parables. There are elements of the parables that are applied, that the Lord makes application of. And there are elements that he makes no application of. For instance, in the parable of the hid treasure, he says that oh shoot, I can't quote it very well, but it's that it was hid in 3 measures of meal. Can't even tell you the name of the parable right now. What significance does the 3 measures of meal have? There's none. He draws no significance to it other than it was a lot of meal, the leaven, the hid leaven, that it was hid in 3 measures of meal. What significance are the 3? None. There's nothing drawn from that, but other than the fact that it was a lot of meal and a little leaven leavened the whole lump. But so here, the Lord is not drawing every element of this parable into his application. What his application is, much is going to be required of some people to whom the Lord has committed much, so that the man who knew what his Lord's will was and refused to do it, he's more responsible than the man who didn't know it. Both are going to be responsible, both are going to be punished, but the judgment is harder against one than the other. I got a comment here by email. Oh, here we go. Oh, my. If I got time for this, I got time. Somebody sent me an email showing all the rations goods in the USA. Now, in other countries, it was different. But tires were rationed, and cars, and bicycles, and gasoline, and fuel oil, and kerosene. Whoop, that'd be tough here in Indiana. Solid fuels, stoves, rubber footwear, shoes, sugar, coffee, processed foods, meats, canned fish, cheese, canned milk, fats, and typewriters were all rationed. Thank you very